All right, welcome everybody to the wireless security lecture. We're going to be moving on. Um, just want to say that everyone did a fantastic job on the midterm. I was very impressed with the grades. Obviously, you will not be having a quiz this week because you took the midterm last. But we're going to go ahead and jump right into wireless security here. Obviously, wireless networks have become really popular over the past couple of decades, and they've quickly replaced or actually enhanced a lot of the wired networks. The ability to become more mobile due to the lack of wires has been a great motivator in the adoption of technology by businesses as well as users. So, in addition to that, the technology that's made it all possible to kind of push networks into areas that have not traditionally been able to go into, like airports and hotels, coffee shops, libraries, and areas like that, where use of wires can kind of be prohibited. So that's kind of the benefit of having wireless security and why it's become so popular. Um, so kind of adding to the security issues associated with Wi-Fi and wireless networks um, is another technology in the form of something like Bluetooth. So while it's not the same as Wi-Fi, it is a wireless technology that does suffer from some of the same general issues that Wi-Fi networks have had to deal with in the past. So with the increasing amount of Bluetooth-enabled devices available, on the market, including smartphones and tablets and other devices, the implications of data leakage associated with Bluetooth are just enormous. I mean, all you have to think about is the type of information the average user stores on their mobile devices to understand the potential issues emerging with Bluetooth. So this week we're gonna mainly talk about Wi-Fi networks, but we also are going to start digging into some of the Bluetooth technologies. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to jump into this. So what we're going to start talking about here is basically what is a Wi-Fi network. Sort of kind of define it a little bit better for us, and try to figure out the very basics. And the risks associated with wireless networks, have definitely increased over the years. I mean, in some cases, dramatically compared to like traditional wired networks. So a lot of times, what will happen is, attackers, hackers, they found that wireless networks allow for much easier targeting of victims and make the penetration into what would be seemingly protected, safe areas simpler than they were before the technology arrived. So, as a result of these perceived risks, both actual and imagined, a lot of companies have kind of slowed their implementation, or actually needlessly, expose themselves to security risks because they can have a wireless network that is secure if they take the time to consider all the issues involved as well as the risks. So let's kind of talk about the kind of overview and some of the finer points of wireless. So wireless networks or Wi-Fi, they kind of fall into the range of technologies covered under as you can see, the IEEE 802.11 standard. So the technology has been adapted for use by everything from laptops and personal computers to smartphones and even video game consoles. So through the use of like wireless technology, users can usually connect to the internet, share resources in ways that weren't possible in the past. But just as a key point, I would remember this right here: the IO 2.11 standard. For that type of thing. So the kind of fine print behind that, as a wireless network, it basically uses radio waves. If we're defining a wireless network, it uses radio waves to transmit data. The technical details that define a wireless network are inside this particular protocol, this standard. And it occurs at the physical layer of the network, and the standard kind of defines Wi-Fi, and it was kind of built to these specific specifications. So, try to move over to this next slide here. So, When it comes to wireless networks, you typically have something like this. You have a wireless network in AP mode, so you have an access point that all the different workstations, laptops, or whatever are able to connect to that access point. Or you have something like a wireless network ad hoc where you're actually sharing resources, kind of between each other, without any kind of wires or anything. But let's go ahead and jump into some of the commonly used sub protocols. So remember, 802.11 is the main protocol when it comes to wireless. But these are just some of the other ones. So these are the 802.11 family of standards, and they kind of evolved from a base standard, the 802.11 that came out in 1997. So initially when it came out, the speeds were really slow, around like 1 to 2 megabytes per second. And it wasn't very popular outside of like specific implementations and deployments. But obviously since then, wireless networks have gotten faster, more widespread, and they use a wider frequency bands than before. As you can see here, all the different protocols are broken down into the frequency as well as the range, etc. So, the question always comes up, so why are all these different letters in the 802.11 protocol family? Well, the short answer to that is that the additional letters correspond to the working groups that came up with modifications to each one. So, for example, the 802.11a refers to the standard that defines changes to the physical network layer, required to kind of support the various frequencies and modulation requirements. And so with each change, there came out a new letter to go along with it. We're not going to spend too much time on this particular subject, and you're not going to be tested on it, but I just did at least want to make sure that you understand. So let's kind of look at it. Obviously, one of the big things that we look at is confidentiality, integrity, and availability when it comes to, this class in general. What's the problem? So, with access control or authentication, ensure that your wireless infrastructure is not used. You want to try to protect it. You want the data, as far as the integrity, you want to ensure that your data packets are not modified. Obviously, them being transmitted through, wirelessly, people can intercept that type of traffic, and you want to make sure that stuff remains confidential. So you ensure that the contents of your wireless traffic is not learned. So there's lots of different threats out there. There's just a quick listing of some of those. We're going to cover quite a few of those towards the end of this class. But I want to kind of go in, jump into the next section. Now, most people are familiar with the service set identifier here. So obviously, once the wireless access point or wireless network is established, so the next step involves getting clients to attach to it, or you want to try to get your laptop to access the access point so you can start transmitting data. So this is the job of the SSID. It's an access. So the access point is going to broadcast the SSID. Which is going to be used by clients or users to kind of identify the network and then attach to it. So the SSID is typically viewed as a text string that people will try to attach to. They'll go searching for it when they're looking for a particular wireless network. So the SSID can be made up of lots of different combinations. And it can only be a maximum of 32 bytes in size. So most of you that have a wireless network, the SSID is actually what is broadcast. That name, whether you make it, the Johnson household or whatever. So the major thing when you're setting up your wireless access point, I think a lot of times, and I notice this sometimes just in my my own neighborhood. When I'm attempting to connect to my my wireless, is that people leave the default names as Linksys or D-Link or something like that, and this can kind of tip off an attacker that you might have left other default settings in place. So they may attempt to try to attack your SSID or your wireless network because of that alone. So it's always important to try to change those just as an extra tip there. So the thing about the SSID is it continually broadcasts by the access point or different points, if you have those in place, and to kind of allow clients to identify to the network, to try to connect to it. And normally, a client or you as the user, or with your laptop, or is configured with the name of the access point in order to kind of to join the given network. So it is possible to think of the SSID configuration on a client as kind of like a token used to access the named wireless network. So kind of think of it like that. So the SSID is actually embedded within the header, within a header of packets. So it is viewable. So on open networks, the SSID is visible, and it can be viewed by any client looking for it. So on closed networks, the SSID is not visible, and in some cases, it's actually called cloaked. So those are some things to keep in mind. So anyway, when it comes to hiding your SSID, there's some, whether this is actually a value to you, or actually masking and not trying to mask your SSID, whether that's really effective security. And in some cases it is. I guess if for the we always mention for attackers that are looking for the easy target, typically what will happen is, hey, I see this SSID, I'm going to go ahead and start attacking it. But at the same time, there are the tools that are out there these days that try to find networks that with strong signals. They're automatically going to pick up that anyway, even if you try to mask it. So it's almost pointless and doesn't really make that much of a difference. All right, so let's start looking at some of the security protocols that to go along with the wireless, and this can get sometimes very complicated. And my recommendation is just hang on. We'll try to go into as much explanation as we possibly can. But we're going to try to look at some of these encryption mechanisms. But I want to talk just briefly about wireless authentication. So when you're actually authenticating, your laptop or clients, or whatever it be, if this is your corporate network, to a wireless network, there's two processes are kind of available when it comes to that. The first is what's called an open system authentication. And this is used when situation when you want to make your network available to like a wide range of people. And this type of authentication occurs when an authentication frame is essentially, it's sent from a client to the access point. So when the access point receives this frame, it verifies its SSID, and if it's correct, the access point sends a verification frame back to the client, allowing the connection to be made. And this is what's called an open system. So the second process is a shared key authentication. And so in this process, a client receives a key ahead of time, and it can kind of connect to that network as needed. So this is how a shared key authentication works. Basically, so the client will send an authentication request to the access point, and then the access point returns a challenge to the client, and then the client encrypts the challenge using the shared key that they both have that it's configured with. And then the access point uses the same shared key to decrypt the challenge, and then it'll look at it and say, okay, these responses are the same. Now I'm going to go ahead and allow this client. It's validated now, and you'll gain access to the network. So that's typical authentication and how it works. So we're going to start digging into the encryption mechanisms to kind of go with this authentication process. So obviously one of the big concerns with wireless network is the fact that all the data is vulnerable because it's being transmitted over the air. It's not it's not at a cable. So without without protection, that data can be sniffed and captured by attackers that they're trying to go after that particular network. So kind of to prevent, or at least mitigate this issue, there's the encryption layer is put into place, and it's included almost all wireless networks these days. So you're always going to have some level of encryption. But before we go into those, there just kind of look at these real quick. You can kind of see what came first, and this, by the way, this is the authentication we were just talking about just a few moments ago. If you want that authentication process, which there may be some questions on the quiz and the final on that, so just keep that in mind. Basically, how authentication works on a wireless. Now, I'm not so much looking at the encryption, but just how an authentication works. So we're gonna start jumping into some of these encryption methods, and these are just the most common used wireless encryption and authentication protocols that are in use today. The wired equivalent privacy, it's probably the oldest, and it's arguably the weakest of all the available encryption protocols. WEP for short. So the WEP standard was it was introduced in kind of the initial solution to wireless security, but the problem is that they quickly found out that it was flawed and it was very vulnerable and easily to crack. It was designed to protect linkage level data for wireless transmission. At the time, they thought it provided the confidentiality and access control, and it was supposed to secure communication between a mobile device and an access point, and etc. So, but they quickly found out how flawed it was and moved away from it. Now, I'm not going to be asking anything about or draw me the WEP encryption and decryption, but if you are interested in how the WEP encryption decryption works, the great little diagram here if you want to dig into it a little deeper. So after they introduced it, obviously, like I said, they found out that it was insecure. The main problem was there was inadequate key management, so it was possible to be exploited. They had shared keys in place. They had an RC4 weakness. One-sided authentication only. AP is not authenticated by mobile devices, and the IP address could be forged. So those were just a couple of the problems that came along with WEP. So they quickly moved away from it right into the WPA. Now the WPA, it came after, and it was intended to kind of address some of these problems that plagued WEP. So in a lot of areas, it did succeed, and it was it was a tougher security protocol, and it uses the extendable authentication protocol framework for authentication. Like I said, it did surpass WEP, and it also uses the temporal key integrity protocol, and so these are just some of the things that were in place. Now, right after the WPA was the WPA2, and it was intended just like the original WPA to address some of the problems. And WPA2, it only came, I think it came a year after WPA, and it was much stronger. It used a tougher encryption, and the standard. It's become the standard these days for all wireless networks. And it uses the extendable authentication protocol. It uses the TKIP and the AES. So this was fantastic when it came out. Now, what's gone above and beyond WPA2 is the WPA2 Enterprise, and you'll find this if you have a corporation that introduces this. This is fantastic because it kind of moves away from the whole pre-shared key. You've got the key, your access point's got the key, and it uses basic radius. So it's an authentication mechanism where a lot of times you can have this link back to your Active Directory, and so this is really, really good if you want to try to centralize your authentication before you actually allow someone to attach to it. So in the slides here, there are some. I mean, you're really not going to be required to kind of understand the whole mechanism. I'm not going to ask you to draw any of this stuff, but Again, this is just the what we're talking about, the pre-shared key in enterprise. So the WPA, even the WPA2, it has a shared secret they use for authentication to an access point. So the problem is that you can, and we're going to go over these types of attacks here shortly. You can actually capture traffic and then attempt to try to use a dictionary track to try to find out what that is. So there's no need of an authentication server. Now here's what I was talking about with the enterprise mode. So this does require authentication. With a radius server, and you're going to use 802.1x for authentication. So a lot of times they'll have this in place, which is the protocol, and then they'll have a certificate to go along with it to say, okay, yep, this is valid. So we talked about the temporal key integrity protocol. So this was for the WPA and WPA2. And this is actually responsible for generating the encryption key. So you need to encrypt your traffic, but you need a key to encrypt it. If you'll remember from some of our previous lectures, as far as encryption keys were concerned, and this is the way that you encrypt the message and you verify its integrity. And so the difference here in between just having a regular key is this key can change. So it is in a type of rotation. So with the encryption key, it's unique to every client that actually connects to it. So we're going to talk about some of the attacks on some of the WPA stuff. So we're talking about WPA, WPA2, WEP, WPA, WPA2. But before we do that, I know that WEP is no longer in use, and it's one of, like I said, the oldest protocols that are out there. When it was originally introduced, it was very flawed when it came out. Sometimes you'll still find WEP. I mean, when we're working with a customer, occasionally I will still find WEP protocols in place, and that just may be the situation with that particular company. And this is definitely not something you want to try to steer for, but it should be avoided. A lot of times you'll have to do some upgrading of the hardware to support like the newer standards. However, the thing is, if there's going to be some companies out there that it's not a realistic at the time for them, whether that be funding or whatever it may be. It is a short-term solution. This should, WEP should always be considered a short-term solution and should be moved away from as quickly as possible. So that's definitely something that you want to keep in mind. But I just kind of want to just briefly hit on that. So although this is an old technology, and it may be sufficient just to be able to throw it up there. If it's old hardware, you want to try to encourage, especially if you're working for a company, to try to move away from that. So let's go ahead and start looking at WPA and some of the types of attacks that came out with it. So I can think the most significant development that was introduced with the WPA protocol was what we were just talking about, the temporal key integrity protocol, which was to try to improve the data encryption. And so before, when they were trying to to encrypt, they had just used one static, unchanging key, and it was used for every frame transmitted. So by changing the key every frame, this kind of, with it moving around in the dynamic, changing the keys made it much more difficult to kind of crack the WEP, but it can still be done. So that was like, the main introduction that came along with it. So dictionary attacks on pre-shared keys, and we're going to get into some of these attacks. That this is how if you can capture that traffic and capture that pre-shared key, then you can crack this stuff. You can also cause a denial of service on this kind of stuff on the WPA. And again, we're gonna some of these slides are a little redundant because we're going to actually get into some of these attacks here in just a few minutes. But as far as the WPA2, this is the standard that you should be going to. The protocol that was used for this one, it was drastically improved. Like I said, WPA was only on the market shortly before WPA2 came out. and it's the 802.11i standard for security. So it did have some similarities with the WPA. So WPA2, it did have the pre-shared key mode, just like previous versions. It relied on the input of a key into each station. But then the WPA2 Enterprise, it uses a server to perform key management and authentication for wireless clients. And again, in corporate world, WPA, if you can implement WPA2 Enterprise with 802.1x, that's definitely what you want to be doing. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into some of the attacks on Wi-Fi and some of the things that I've seen over the course of not only just web, WPA and WPA2, types of exploits that can be done. So when it comes to this stuff, like there's a lot of offline attacks. So the kind of idea behind an offline attack is you want to be close in proximity to the access points, kind of observe the handshake that's taking place in between the client and the access point. So the handshake is like the authentication of the client and the access point. So again, like we were talking about within that little step process toward the beginning, again, I would highly recommend that you understand that authentication process. So if you set up the attack just right when you're attempting to attack a wireless access, and because this is all out in the air, you try to capture the handshake, and if you can capture it, it's possible that you can actually recover the key by just recording it and then taking it offline. So the main reason why this attack works is that the handshake, it's completely in the clear. I mean, it's out in the air. It's not over the wire. It's right out there in the air, and so it's possible to get enough information to kind of break this key. That's one type of attack. So a lot of times, like the deauthentication attack works really well against Wi-Fi. So it approaches kind of the problem of observing the handshake between the client and the access point, like we were just talking about. If you're trying to do an offline attack, you can see this, and you can actually, there are tools out there that'll kind of force the client and access point to actually disconnect from each other, and then so when they reconnect, you can actually capture that. So the attacker will induce it'll look for a client that's already connected to the access point, disconnect it, which will lead the client to try to re-access it and re-establish that connection, and then it'll see that authentication happen, allowing that information to kind of be captured and then cracked. So there's lots of Linux tools out there that'll kind of help you with this. So the software package that lots of different ones out there will kind of target the network. One that's using something like WPA2 and transmit packets. It'll keep sending lots and lots of packets, and it tries to kick clients off the network. So once that's done, then it'll start looking at that re-authentication process, trying to capture that handshake. So these are just some of the tools that are out there. So in practice, it is possible to actively or passively perform that attack. Passively means that basically you could just wait for a client to connect. Like, hey, you're just sitting around watching that traffic. You see somebody connect, you'll capture it, and you'll get the information, then try to take it offline. Actively trying to attack a wireless point means that you try to target multiple clients, multiple targets, and you'll try to send packets over to try to kick them off, and then you start listening and gather enough packets in order to try to capture as much as you can. So one is obviously more intrusive than the other. So active and passive attacks. Remember that, active and passive attacks on a Wi-Fi network. So that's definitely something we may revisit. But let's go ahead and jump into war driving here. So war driving, it's one of the most common forms of action that target wireless networks. Basically, an attacker will drive around a neighborhood or an area with a mobile device or a computer or something like that, and has a wireless card set up. And the software that's installed is trying to detect access points. So that's what it's looking for. Hey, look, let's see if I can find any access points that don't have any security on it. And this happens more often than not, trying to find that. Um, so it'll look for that SSID, so for the beacon for the network, and try to get as much information that it can. So once the network is detected, it can be singled out, for later attacks. Like if it says, hey, they've got web encryption, WEP on there. Well, this is really easy. I can break into that one. Especially when it comes, if you have your corporate network and your corporate resources on your wireless network, or like for instance, think about it like this. So you're an attacker, you're war driving, in a corporate area, and you see, okay, well, this company right here doesn't have it's a completely open network. There's no passcode on it. I'll connect to it, and you run something like, you try to map the network and look around for what's out there, and then suddenly you realize you can see their file sharing server, or their email server, or their Active Directory. So the wireless network is actually connected to their internal network. So the risk here is that you're able to, and I won't say who, but there were several different clients that I found this happen where they have a wireless network with no password on it, and I was actually able to connect to the internal network easily and map it out. Or if you have a WEP encryption on it, and that's easily broken as well. So these are just some of the attacks that happen against the wireless network that are easy to do with war driving. And there's a lot of variations when it comes to war driving. So there's stuff like war flying. So think of it like this: using something like a drone. And again, you think, just when you think you've seen it all, somebody using a drone to try to, that load up something like if you're familiar with a Raspberry Pi, a Raspberry Pi can be purchased for like, $35 or something like that. It's the size of a pack of playing cards, and you hook that up to a drone. And this hardware is really powerful, and it can run, Linux on it, and multiple tools. Some people can install like custom distributions of Linux on it, and it can have like a traditional wired interface on it, but it can also do Wi-Fi as well. So the kind of implications is that as an intruder can plug this device, plug this device up into your drone or something like that, target a network, and in a few short moments looking for an entry point into a corporation. There's also, believe it or not, there's actually war ballooning. Not kidding. So people will actually make use of a balloon, which I've seen. There's war walking. These are just variations where people just walk up and they'll have all this equipment, and they're looking for access points, places where they can break in. And there's people that'll do what's called war chalking. They'll place a symbol out in front of a building where they're getting a wireless signal, and the symbols will tell tell that there's an access point that's nearby, and it can actually provide data how to access it. So people will still do that war chalking. That kind of came from actually hobo marks, where people were vagrants in the 1930s, and they would tell other vagrants where they could get a free meal, or where the cops frequent or something like that. But yeah, they do that with access points as well. So yeah, it's a crazy world, but yeah, that's definitely something we look at. Another type of attack is setting up actual rogue access points, and this is something that we do at my particular office. So it's basically it's effective way of kind of breaching a network by violating trust. So basically, an attacker will install like a new access point that's completely unsecured, behind a company firewall. They'll throw one up. Like for instance, if they're able to access the inside, they'll throw up this rogue access point. Trying to extract information, and what they'll basically do is they'll try to mimic the SSID of the corporate network, and it'll look like a corporate access point. So people will see it. They'll look at that SSID, they'll pull it up, and they'll go, oh well, that's our corporate network. That's fine. I can connect to that. That shouldn't be an issue. And in actuality, it's actually a rogue access point. So it's an attacker trying to set something up so they can look at your information as it's coming across. So another type of attack is MAC spoofing. So um, the access, a lot of times with access points, you can actually set up MAC filtering. So they'll try to say, okay, is it a security measure? Maybe. You can say, okay, anybody with these hardware addresses, these MAC addresses are the only people that can connect to my wireless network. So it's basically, as we've talked about before, blacklisting and whitelisting. So it's essentially just saying that, your whitelisting a group. So only these people can access the network. So if somebody deploys this kind of technique, so an attacking party can basically attempt to spoof addresses of MAC addresses of approved clients. They'll switch their MAC to make it look so they won't get blocked. So it's possible to use such tools as like I think SMAC is one. Change MAC. There's a bash script that does that. In some cases, like the hardware configuration settings for a network card may actually allow you to change your MAC address, but this is another type of one that they use to, with the war driving and rogue access points and MAC spoofing. But to be perfectly honest, a lot of attacks on Wi-Fi, and I've pointed this problem out before in other areas of the class, is misconfiguration is a problem with access points, and just like it is throughout the network. So, like, you can have all the security features in the world, but they're not going to help you if they're misconfigured or not configured at all. So the real danger here is heightened since wireless access point provide an ideal access anywhere solution for for attackers and other people that want to go after your network. Because if they can't physically connect to the network, they can sit out in the parking lot and start going after you, and they don't even have to walk into the building. So this is obviously popular attacks, and then this is one that I've definitely tried over the years, and that's one of my first types of attacks that I'll go at with a new client that wants a wireless audit or something like that. So when it comes to wireless networks, common sense a lot of times comes in place. Don't use it unless you have to. Configurations of access points. Don't leave default passwords on it. Especially a lot of people do this with the administration of it. They'll use admin, or password, or whatever it is. Kind of limit the physical access, to be able to get to those access points. Use the WPA2. Don't use the WEP or the WPA. If you can use WPA Enterprise with the 802.1x authentication, then great. Kind of limit the coverage. Again, this is masking or disabling the SSI broadcasting is not very effective, so I'm going to have to disagree with this particular point. Set up a list of acceptable MAC addresses. This is possible, even though, MAC spoofing is possible. Again, it all comes down to layered security in depth. So you want to have the security in depth in place. You want to be more fortified and tougher to get into than the next guy. Rotate the keys regularly if possible. If you do have something like, where you're not using 802.1x, which is, connecting to your Active Directory, and you just have a password, change that up, as much as possible. All right, so we've talked about the wireless security. We're going to get into just briefly hit some of the Bluetooth security. So I just kind of want to talk about some of this. So obviously, Bluetooth is a wireless technology, and it's been seen in mobile devices all over the place, in the marketplace. And it's a short range wireless technology. It's used to to connect devices like headsets, media players, and those types of things. And it operates on a 2.4 gigahertz frequency range, and it's designed to work at short distances. So obviously, this is not something that is going to be used over a really wide range. Usually, it's here it says 1 to 50 meters. Usually about 33 feet, give or take, is usually what you'll see It's fairly limited range. Now, that doesn't mean it is possible to actually extend the range if you do some research. So a couple years ago, Popular Science, it's a pretty popular magazine. They published some information on kind of how to extend the range of Bluetooth using like a cell phone antenna and a Bluetooth adapter. So basically, if you get down to it with a little elbow grease and you invest about $100, in about a half hour you can create your own antenna, and it'll actually quadruple the range of like your standard Bluetooth system. So if you're feeling ambitious, you want to go out and visit YouTube and learn how to kind of make your own. They call them Bluetooth sniper rifles. Kind of extend your range. Knock yourself out. You can definitely go look at that. So when it comes to Bluetooth threats, just like wireless, there is tons of threats that are facing that you got to take into account. So Bluetooth it suffers from a lot of shortcomings that the industry is slowly trying to address. With each success, more flaws pop up. And it can still be exploited. So the technology has already seen like a ton of attacks, and they're told on different victims that the form of like losing information, leaking calendars and address books or contact information, creating like a bugging device. That's been a problem with some Bluetooth devices because of certain software. It can actually activate cameras and microphones and stuff like that. An attacker actually using a remote control, it can use it as the phone like a remote control, making phone calls or connected to the internet. Some attackers have actually they've been known to kind of fool victims into disabling like any kind of security for the Bluetooth connections to try to pair and steal information. There's also been mobile phone worms that can exploit some of the Bluetooth connections to kind of replicate and spread. So there are definitely different types of attacks that are out there. So these are definitely things to be mindful. I think we've got a slide here just for that. So there is some key generation, when it comes to Bluetooth. Again, you're not going to need to know these diagrams. I'm not going to force you into that, but there's no there's different modes when it comes to Bluetooth. There's no encryption. The broadcast traffic is unencrypted, and all traffic encrypted according to a master link key. So these are the different modes when it comes to Bluetooth. So here's I just want to kind of go over some of these as far as the attacks are concerned. There's bluejacking. Bluejacking is basically it's more annoying than malicious. So the attack, it takes the form of like sending an anonymous text message via Bluetooth. And since the attack exploits like the basic operation of the Bluetooth protocol, it's kind of hard to defend against, other than making like the device like non-discoverable. But basically, that's how it works. So you'll go to bluejacking is like you'll locate an area with a high density of like mobile users, like a mall or an airport or convention center, something like that. You'll go to the contacts in your devices like address book and create a new contact and enter a message. Is basically what you want to do. Then save the contact and with a name, but with no phone number. And you're gonna send that via Bluetooth. So then you choose a phone from the list of devices that you see, and then just send the message. And if all goes well, then your new friend should receive the message that you crafted. So that's basically how a blue jacking. If you feel like you want to try that out and send them unsolicited messages, I just told you how to do it. So if you really want to do that, it's like I said, it's more annoying than anything else. You're just sending unrequested messages to somebody. Another type, blue snarfing. So this attack, it's designed to kind of extract information, from a long range, from a Bluetooth device. So if you execute the attack, you can actually get address books, call information, text information, and other kind of stuff from a device. And because of the nature of the attack, it's very evasive and extremely dangerous. And I will not be teaching you how to do that. So there's denial of service, there's worms, there's backdooring, there's also honeypots. And this is kind of a newer way that Bluetooth it has been exploited. So basically, a Bluetooth device is targeted, and they're kind of drawn in to kind of use a Linux-based tool. It's called BluePot. It's designed to kind of accept incoming malware and respond to Bluetooth attacks. So you'll set this honeypot up, and it can kind of discover and target Bluetooth devices a little easier. So if you want to do some research into that, you're more than welcome. But in essence, I know this was a rather short and easy chapter, chapter lecture this week. We just kind of looking at Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and some of the authentication and encryption that goes along with it. And we've seen, the wireless is powerful and it's convenient, and it kind of frees people up from having to use wires and allow a network to really expand in the areas that you normally couldn't go into. And we've kind of looked at a couple of those things, and we've also looked at some vulnerabilities and the whole range of concerns that kind of go along with it. So the problem is in kind of today's corporate America, it's like you're going to have a wireless network in place. I mean, it's just there, as well as some Bluetooth-enabled devices. So misconfigurations, misapplications of the technology, social engineering, just plain old mistakes. These things are going to happen, and they're going to lead to significant vulnerabilities in your corporation. So trying to secure those and limit the risk is pivotal. And as you can see, just the simple types of attack, attacker can, with an antenna and the right software, can easily, using a wireless network to kind of break in, take over a network, or at least, steal some information. So these are the types of dangers that we looked at, and I just want you to kind of remember, as far as the defense strategies that we talked about, as far as the encryption, the authentication, the 802.11 is the protocol that networks typically are associated with the wireless, the web, the WPA, the WPA2. They're basically the frontline defenses. WEP, WEP is weaker and broken. But if it's configured correctly, WPA2, they offer a lot of strong integrity and protection, from these types of attacks. So that's going to be all for this week. Just watch the video, and we will have a quiz on this next week. All right. Have a good evening.